and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. First, before we get into anything, our thoughts, our prayers, our hopes to all of those folks injured and killed in today's train derailment. What a horrible, horrible tragedy. And I just, when I woke up this morning and I'm reading through, just a horrible tragedy. And like I said, our thoughts, our hopes, all of that go out to the folks injured and the families of those who were killed. Just tragic. And, again, I keep coming back to, and the first thing that popped into my head is, this is why we need infrastructure improvements, why we need to be pursuing that next technology. And, sadly, this was the inaugural run of this particular line. And I'm sure we will get to the bottom and find out what happened. And the hope is that it never happens again, that we find, we fix, and this never happens again. Now, sadly, and I got a couple emails from folks today saying, this is why we can't have mass transit, which is just, sad and dumb. But again, as I said, our thoughts go up. Today, tax day. Well, here's the thing. Tomorrow we know that the House of Representatives is going to vote on this horrible tax scheme, which is going to mean higher taxes for you and me. It's going to mean more uninsured. It's going to mean that it's a win-win for the Republicans. Higher taxes on working people and kicking the poor while they're down. That seems to be the MO. The modus operandi of the Republican Party is, let's screw those working people and then kick those poor people while they're down. And look, there's a lot of problems with this tax scheme. Income inequality that we already know is bad. We have staggering income inequality. This tax scheme is only going to make it worse with what is absolutely, in my view, the most regressive tax policy possible, or at least the worst one in my lifetime. I guess you could say that there are more regressive taxes in other places. I don't know. Find me one. Maybe it's all those idiots who keep saying, what we need is a sales tax. Everything should be sales taxed. And you go, yeah, so we can screw the working people even more. I was in Cleveland this past weekend, and when we went and bought my son a snowsuit because we went to watch a football game outside. We watched the Browns lose their 14th straight while sitting in a stadium that's right on the lake in 30-some degree temperature. So we went and we bought him some snow pants and stuff so he doesn't get cold, of which he was not, by the way. And when I got the receipt back, I was like, wow, the tax on clothing in Ohio is 8%, whereas where I'm from in Pennsylvania, it's nothing, because we know poor people buy clothes and working class folks buy clothes. So it's one of the things the state of Pennsylvania has excluded from the taxes the sales tax. And I think it's a good thing. But not in Ohio, because, hey, we're going to go after those poor people. And again, you look at all of these regressive taxes that they keep throwing out there. And what we've seen in this tax bill is, for the first time, as it was explained to me, the very first time that we've seen earned income. That is the income that you swing a hammer, drive a truck, dig a ditch, pound away at the keys on the computer. People who work, punch a clock, collect a paycheck, they're going to actually be taxed at a higher rate as opposed to the ownership class, which I got to be honest is kind of scary and bizarre. But it shows the priorities of this administration and of the Republican parties. Because look, I'm not going to put all of this on Donald Trump. And I know, really? No, I don't think this is Trump's plan. To be honest, I think Trump's plan looks a lot like this piece of paper right here with nothing on it. I think, in fact, every policy paper that Donald Trump has is like this, a blank sheet of paper. I don't think there's much, just like some of the stuff we hear come out of his mouth, a blank slate. So there's nothing there. All of these policies that Trump is now, because look, I'm sure he was the kid who had other people do his homework for him. There's no doubt in my mind that that's how it happened. So when I see the on the campaign trail, he says, well, we're going to insure everyone. And yet every one of the policies that the Republicans came out with, it was worse than the last. 20,000, 20 million, 23 million, millions of people uninsured. And yet Trump said, this is a great plan. It's exactly what I want. Leaving millions uninsured while he said on the campaign trail, everyone would be covered with great insurance. This tax plan, again, I don't think he has a clue of what's in it. And I think he actually believes, in his heart of hearts, I believe he believes it, that it's actually going to be bad for him. I think they have convinced him, hey, dupe, this is going to be horrible for you. This is what your talking point is. I think he buys it. And yet we know not going to be bad for him at all. In fact, going to be really good. Really good. I was having breakfast on Saturday morning with my uncle who has done very well for himself. And we had breakfast with his gang of other really wealthy people. And surprisingly, and this is one of those weird moments where my uncle is the crazy right-winger in the group, where all of these other really, really rich people are talking about how bad the tax plan is and how it's going to hurt, the economy. And they're actually thoughtful about it. They're going, this is a bad plan. It's going to harm, your social safety net. It's going to harm working people. It's going to make things worse because a lot of them were business people who go, I'm not going to have customers now. That's a bad thing. And one of the knocks against it was that, one of the guys said, well, it's going to hurt real estate investment because of the interest deduction on high mortgages. And it turns out that Bob Corker got himself in the middle of that and fixed it. So even that's in there to help the billionaire class. And oh, by the way, we're going to add another $1 trillion to the debt. Did I mention that? With absolutely nothing to show for it. Now, again, I go back to my days of taking economics courses, and I remember it like it was yesterday. The professor saying, look, there's good debt and there's bad debt. And the example that he gave was very clear. He said, look, you lose your job tomorrow and you've got a credit card with $5,000 on it. He said, good debt is you go out and you get a resume made, you print off a resume, you buy a new suit, you get a comb to brush your hair, you get a razor to shave with, maybe some new shoes. You're trying to make yourself presentable to a new employer. Maybe you take a class, maybe you learn a new skill. That's good debt. That's worth going into debt for. There's the other side of this. He goes, now, if you take that credit card and you go, well, you know what? I'm out of a job and I got some free time to go to Hawaii. That is bad debt. It's simple and it makes perfect sense. It seems like we're pursuing hey, we got time, let's go to Hawaii track. because we're putting another $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, I've seen reports all over, on our national debt over the next decade with absolutely nothing to show for it outside of a larger and wealthier billionaire class. And you look at this and you go, at what point do we not wake up and go, hey, bad idea? And here's the reality. We, you and me, the working people of this country, we're saying that loudly. I've seen polling as high as 70%. 70% of we, the people, are opposed to this horrible tax plan. But guess what? They're still going to pass it. And you remember the other part of this? And this is one of those things that makes me go, well, I guess they have no other thought process but to lie. What happened to this was simplifying the tax code? Do you remember that? You're going to do your post. All your taxes will be done on this postcard. You remember that? Really? I mean, it would be laughable if it weren't so insane. And I think my favorite statement on the tax bill said that it responded to an already complex tax code with a Pandora's box of new tax gimmicks. And I think that really gives me an image, because there's so much stuff in there that we don't even know about. It's 1,100 pages. 1,100 pages of, hey, remember when they said they were going to read everything? Do you honestly believe every one of these Republicans read every one of those 1,100 pages? Because I don't buy it. Not at all. And remember how it was going to stop outsourcing? It was going to stop the offshoring of jobs. We're going to punish them. Remember that? Well, it doesn't. Not even close. In fact, it makes it worse, and it rewards those multinationals for, well, doing more of the same. Those same companies that play the profit shifting game, they actually get an increased incentive to do more of it. And, well, more offshore profits, and of course, ultimately more jobs going offshore. And I look at this, and every one of the problems that we have, this tax plan makes worse. You remember when the Tea Party remember when those Tea-Twits were out screaming around? You remember when the Trumpkins complained in 2016? All of those things that I heard them complain about, this makes worse. And the thing is, I don't hear them complaining anymore. Where are they? Are they so shocked that they've been so bad duped that they're hiding? I mean, is that possible? I guess the other part of it is, did they even exist? Are they like UFOs? Were they Russian trolls? I mean, remember that guy from Central PA who, stood up and screamed, "Get your government hands off my Medicare"? Was he real or Memorex? I mean, was he a hologram or something? Figment of our imagination? I don't know. A trick, a goof, a dare? I don't know. But where are they now? Where's VH1 when we need them? Where are they now? Where are those Tea-Twits now? This tax plan screws every working person, and badly. Because you remember how this was going to be about the middle class? Remember how this was going to help the middle class? It was going to be all about them. And I know. I guess middle class depends on how you define what the middle class is. Maybe middle income is better. Or maybe my preferred working class is better. No matter. What we're told, and we've been told all along, is that this Republican plan is going to help the struggling masses. It's going to help the heartland. It's going to help those who suffered because of bad free trade schemes, deindustrialized out of their job. It was going to help them. It was all for them. Well, guess what? Not even close. Not even close. But here's the thing. According to the Tax Policy Center, what they have said is by 2027, 53% of us, and a lot of those are going to be in the middle class, 53% of us are going to pay more in taxes under this Republican plan. More ttn half. And look, there are some who say, well, the Republicans are playing the 50% game. They only need 50 plus one. Evidently not, because 53% of us in 2027 are going to pay more, and we know that. And in that year of 2027, this tax scheme, 82.8%, almost 83, but 82.8% according to the Tax Policy Center, will go to the top 1%. And you go, but Rick, that's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. It's wrong. It's insane. But you know what? It's what they're doing. And guess what's coming on the heels when this passes? Because according to AARP, you've got congressional leaders right now debating a tax bill that's going to trigger at least $25 billion in Medicaid cuts. Or in Medicare cuts. We know that's coming. And I said that from the beginning. Look, this is really all about creating a crisis so that they can go down the road and go, you know what, those Medicaid people, get them off. Go get a job, lazy. And Granny, no more for you. The unborn need their 529s. Think about this for a second. We're going to be kicking Granny to the curb so that the unborn can have a 529 plan. And that the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren of our wealth class can, have retirement security and health care for themselves. Because you old people are depriving them. Think about that for a minute. How screwed up is this? It's a horrible plan. It's horrible for workers. It's horrible for the poor. But it's great if you're in the top 1 to 10%. Maybe even 20. So what's it going to take to get people to call their representatives tomorrow and their senators the day after? Because we know the votes are coming. And we know that the Republicans are eyeing this as their opportunity to finally do something. It's their big win. It's their big chunk of coal for Christmas for the rest of us. This is their win. And while they win, we lose. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Helene Olin's going to be here to give us some of her thoughts. Did Susan Collins sell out? Did Bob Corker take a kickback? Lots of questions, lots of thoughts. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that Congress passed the 18th Amendment, which outlawed the transportation, manufacture, and sale of alcohol. The amendment went into effect 13 months later. According to John Rumbarger, author of Profits, Power, and Prohibition, the temperance movement centered on tightening social control of working people. Workers often met in bars and saloons to unwind after work and to socialize. But in the days before union halls, the saloon also doubled as a headquarters where workers could talk about problems on the job like mistreatment and poor working conditions. They used the saloon as a place to plan and organize strikes. It also served as a site for workers to talk politics and organize around political parties. Many prominent industrialists complained that saloons were breeding grounds for labor unrest and radical politics. They also feared a growing immigrant working class that tied its fate to powerful political machines like those in Chicago, New York, and Boston. The anti-saloon movement brought a strange mix into its coalition. It included the KKK, who worried of the growing power of immigrant workers. But it also included progressives, who worked for labor harmony and sobriety as a means of public health. The anti-saloon movement also targeted German brewers. The United States had just entered World War I, and anti-German sentiment was so high that many considered German breweries to be working for the Kaiser, their product a sap on the energy of servicemen and grain production to feed the U.S. troops. But alcohol flowed freely throughout the 1920s, creating both the jazz speakeasy and bootlegging syndicates. It would ultimately be repealed by 1933. 3, Labor History in 2, brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
Run to the hills. Run for your life. Run to the hills.
Yes, run to the hills. Get your tax breaks and go. Find that offshore tax shelter. Thank you, territorial tax. The big statement today, and it appears someone slipped something into Susan Collins' drink. She said, quote, tax relief and reform will lift our economy, leading to higher wages for workers and more revenue for government. Again, we've heard that for about 35 years now. I think that's been the Republican mantra, that if we just cut enough of those taxes for the 1%, it will come raining down on us like yellow rivers of gold and honey, and it'll be great. Hasn't seemed to happen. And that's why, look, at some point we've got to call, email, write, sit in the office, get arrested, do whatever, but we got to stop it. Here to talk about the plan, it looks like it might pass. Looks like it's going to happen. We've asked our friend Helene Olin, who is a financial writer, smart person on the tax stuff, someone that I trust. Helene, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you for having me on this evening.
So, I look at this statement by Susan Collins, and I just, when I saw it, it just stopped me, and I go, is there no hope here? It's going to lead to higher wages for workers. How exactly is giving a huge tax cut to a rich guy going to help a working person?
Well, it only works if you believe in trickle-down economics, right? The idea that, the wealthy will take all their newfound gains and spend it and set off an avalanche of spending among the lower orders. Unfortunately, for the Republicans, we've known for about 40 years that that doesn't work. Yet they continue to peddle the same story. So that's the story this week. And unfortunately for all of us, we're all going to slowly find out how inaccurate it is.
And as I pointed out earlier, by 2027, 53% of us are going to be paying higher taxes. And I've been asking the question for a while, where are all those T-twits and where are the Trumpkins who have been whining and complaining, and where are they at? Did we lose them? Maybe VH1 should do a special on where are they now?
I know, it's kind of unbelievable. I mean, what we know is the typical middle income, tax filer will save roughly about $900 a year. And that is a temporary $900, right? Because over time it will get smaller. And then, of course, in 2025, it completely goes away. On the other hand, the 1% are looking at savings of more than $50,000. And strangely enough, the various breaks they're going to take advantage of don't come with a sunset provision. They just keep going on and on and on.
What do you say to the person, though, Helene, who goes, well, what'll happen is that, in 10 years when it comes time, they'll extend those tax breaks so that we don't, take to the streets with pitchforks and fiery sticks.
I'm not in the business of predicting the future. Just because we think it will happen does not mean it will happen at all. And I think that's, if you believe that this tax cut is appropriate, it's a pretty risky proposition to accept in return for the tax cut.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of this, we've got so many needs in this country, and infrastructure being a huge part of it. I mean, yesterday you had all the power going out of the airport in Atlanta. Today you had the horrible tragedy, of the train derailment on its inaugural trip. It just seems to me that there's a lot better places we could be spending this $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion than handing it off with wish and hope.
I completely agree. And I think this is one of the great cons of our time. Or, I mean, I'm using the word con here lightly because the vast majority of taxpayers seem to see through it, right? Whenever there's a poll done, people don't want this. They're not interested in this. They don't believe they're going to benefit. And they do believe the wealthy win. Yet the Republicans are insisting on pushing this forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that just makes you wonder, if they listen at all. Because, I saw a poll not too long ago. It said, like 70% of the country was opposed to this tax plan. And you go, anytime in this country as divided and polarized as we are, you get 70% to say that they're against something. You would think the politicos would listen.
Right, and especially a tax cut, right? When was the last time you ever heard of anybody being against a tax cut? We appear to have found that moment in our history.
Yeah,
and this is like just some sort of epic grab on the part of on behalf of the 1%.
Well, I go back to that statement by the congressman from New York, Chris Collins, who said, "Look, my donors want it, and he said if I don't get it for them, don't ever come back to them." And again, to me, the message that comes out of that is, voters be damned. It's all about the money.
I totally agree. This is completely about the donor class and what they want. Secondarily, it's about the Republicans. I mean, this is what could best be described as a weaponized tax bill. First, it targets people who did not vote for the Republican Party as a whole. So people living in blue states, for example, will lose significant tax benefits because of the limit, the rather arbitrary limit of $10,000 on state and local property and income taxes. Second, this is a real attempt to starve the beast, and it's an attempt to starve the beast in two different fashions, right? First, that contraction of the state and local property tax deduction on the federal taxes is going to make it much harder for states to raise taxes or other revenue on their own. And you might say, well, why would we want them to do that? Well, one of the reasons is because there was an argument that the states would sort of take over from the federal government as long as Trump was in charge. And we would do things like expand Medicaid and set up retirement plans for people who don't have a workplace retirement plan, and so on down the line. Now this all becomes much, much harder. Second, it's a way of starving the beast as well. And this is something that Paul Ryan has more or less already admitted to, by the fact that it's going to make it a lot harder to fund Medicare. And you're already hearing stuff about entitlement reform and that terrible Social Security that's just draining the future of millennials, never mind student loans, right? And it's very clear what's in their sights next. And as I said, there's not even much attempt to disguise this at all. And of course, this is an epic con, because what did Trump campaign on? I won't cut Medicare and Social Security.
Well, you throw on top of that, we're going to have health insurance for everyone. We're going to do tax cuts for the working poor and the working class. It's going to be great. And I look, there's part of me that if I didn't know any better, may have been enticed by the Trump argument during the campaign, especially when you look at a lot of areas like where I grew up, where these free trade schemes have cost millions of people their jobs. Deindustrialization cost more jobs. There's part of me that kind of understands. But when you look at what they're doing, and I'll be honest, almost every bit of what they're doing, I said they were going to do during the election, you just go, why didn't we listen, and when will we wake up?
Exactly. I mean, to me, what a lot of voters are doing is it's almost like they're in a teeter-totter, right? And they're looking to get help. So they sort of run from one side to the other. And, they vote Democrat thinking that will help. And then there's a foreclosure crisis and nobody really helps very much. So they vote Republican thinking, well, maybe they'll help because the free trade has killed us too. And then, of course, they vote Republican, and this is what happens. And so you're starting to already see the turn back towards the Democrats, right? Whoever thought a Democrat would win Senate seat in Alabama in our lifetime again, right? I never thought I'd see that. I don't know about you. And it just shows this just sort of increasing desperation among the public to get somebody to listen to them.
Yeah, I think as one person I know told me, he says, look, even a drowning man will grab an anchor out of the hope that maybe that's the lifeline.
Right. I mean, you can't blame people for it. But on the other hand, I mean, you can blame someone in this case because Trump was such an obvious con. I mean, I admit I live in New York, but I mean, the track record goes back decades. I mean, he was, he won't release his tax returns. He declared bankruptcy numerous times. He kept, he boasted basically about, not paying taxes on a debate stage more than once. I mean, it was just absurd that anybody would fall for this. But on the other hand, you get where people don't totally buy the other side half the time either, unfortunately.
No, and that's absolutely true. But looking at this, I mean, one of the frustrating things is, I guess, you go back to that old line, elections have consequences, and this is a big one. I mean, when you look at the fact that, in 2027, 53% of the country is going to pay higher taxes, while the top 1% reaps almost 83% of the benefits. There's just something seriously wrong with the balance. And look, I think there's still time. Maybe I'm just the eternal optimist, but I think there's still time to be calling your representative, hammering the senators' phones and email boxes and fax machines, and sitting in offices and all of that to try and stop this monstrosity.
I agree. I mean, I beg anybody who lives in a Republican district to do that and make an effort to explain, what a disaster this is going to be. What these people are thinking voting for it is kind of beyond me. I can only assume in some cases they're really not terrifically interested in getting reelected in 2018 and are moving forward with their next career plan, frankly.
Or they live in such gerrymandered gerrymandered districts that they don't have fear of the voter.
Right, but I mean, again, when you get a Democratic senator elected from Alabama, you really got to be in a seriously gerrymandered district not to be afraid of the voter in 2018 if you're a Republican at this point.
That's a good point. So let me ask you, other side of this, is there anything in this that you see as positive? Look, because I see a lot of economists going, it's not, I mean, even the Goldman Sachs analysts are saying maybe 200,000 jobs, and yet Jamie Dimon coming out saying, no, it's JP Morgan Chase. 2 million jobs, Jamie Dimon said, while his analysts are saying, maybe 200,000, maybe not.
I don't see necessarily this inspiring much in the way of job growth for the simple reason that most of the gains, most of the job growth gain is predicated on the fact these corporate taxes will be paid. They'll be brought back into the country, the money. And, excuse me, by the way, I had a cold last week. And that will spur companies to invest and hire more people. In fact, what they're most likely to do is spur them to buy stocks back and pay higher dividends, which again will only enrich the top tier of the population.
Right.
The other thing I would say is there's really no way to know outside of some basic stuff what the impact is going to be, because we still don't really understand this. I mean, this was slapdash together. No public hearings held. Clearly very sloppily put together. The chances are incredible there's going to be blowback in more than one area that we can't even predict while we're talking right now. And to say that this has the possibility of doing good in some area is just absurd. It's probably, even if it has some nice effects in one area or another, the chances are incredible it will be outweighed by the negative.
Do you think anyone read the 1,100 pages? I mean, outside of the fact that there were no hearings, as you pointed out, and that they are literally ramming this down our throats. So again, where are my Tea Party people with their "you're ramming it down my throat"? Do you think they actually read the 1,100 pages?
I don't believe anybody read the 1,100 pages in total. Do you?
No, of course not. But I just had to ask the question because, again, I go back to the Obama years. And, all of the finger pointing and the statements of, you didn't read it. And I kind of turned the ignorant Nancy Pelosi comment around from, the more you find out that's in it, the more you'll like it, to the more we find out what's in this monstrosity, the worse we're going to like it. Right.
And that's what seems to be going on here, is people don't like it very much. I mean, think about it. It's hard to make the human resources people angry, but they're furious because they now have to redo tax forms for millions of workers on no notice. The new taxes go into effect in a couple of weeks. Okay, this thing's hasn't even passed yet. I mean,
so let me ask you this: for those of us who are going to have to file our taxes in just 4 months, this is going to happen for April, right?
Well, this starts to take effect for January of next year. So it's the tax returns it's the taxes for 2018 filed in 2019.
Okay.
But
good.
I should say, and this was something that enraged me, you might have seen me tweeting about this the other night, is there were a lot of people publishing articles, doing radio programs and whatnot, suggesting to people things they could do to make their position better for next year, right? Before this is even passed Congress, before a final version was even released, never mind passed and signed into law. And some of these things have turned out to not be true. I don't even want to say what they are in case people mishear me and go off and do them. And I will be honest and say I was asked more than once to comment on this, and I simply refused and said quite firmly, I think this is not okay. This is irresponsible because we don't know what's going to be in the final version. And we really don't know what we should be advising people. And yes, I realize you're publishing with the caveat we don't know, but people often don't see that or realize that, right? And that I felt was a real issue as well. And I think it compounded the confusion for some.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that someone told me is I should just incorporate, be a corporate person because my tax rate will be lower.
It really depends on how much you're earning, right? But again, there's other issues involved. I mean, so part of it is how much you're earning, but some of it is related to expenses, and some of it is related to health insurance and those sorts of expenses. Basically, the other beneficiaries of this, which brings me to my other point, the other beneficiaries of this besides the 1%, who do you think?
Politicians and landowners.
The tax preparing industry.
Oh, yeah, because this was supposed to be simpler, right?
Yeah,
this was supposed to be a postcard.
I mean the high-end ones, right? I'm not sure how great H&R Block's going to do out of this because, for the lower end, lower income earners, in some ways they have less need to use a tax preparer, right? But for people who have a decent six-figure income, say, right, who feel they can afford $10K or $20K to a tax preparer all of a sudden for some high-end consulting, this is a bonanza coming down the pike. I mean, the amount of just of reforming and redoing people's whole, financial lives is going to be extraordinary. There's just so many little, borderline scams within this. One of my favorites, it's been pointed out by a few people, is, you can now use a 529 account, not just for college, but for children's private school. And you think, well, why would I put money in and then withdraw it in a year, right, to pay the next year's tuition? And someone worked out some numbers and says, well, actually, you'll save a couple $100 if you do that. I mean, it seems absurd, but I guess on one level, if you can afford a private school tuition, yeah, you're probably going to do that.
So, I mean, think about that. And I talked about that exact thing last week. We're rewarding private tuition while penalizing people who buy school supplies for kids in public schools and punishing, homeowners who pay property taxes to have decent public schools.
Right. I mean, and the schools are almost certainly going to take a hit because especially in these areas where the limit on the state and local property taxes deduction is really going to have to impact, right? Like a perfect example is I live a few miles from Westchester, the suburb of New York City, right? The typical average tax there now for property alone is $16,000. So that's 50% over the limit right there. That doesn't even take into account state income taxes. I mean, it defies belief to believe that that's not going to start impacting schools within a few years.
Wow, just absolutely amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. And the hope is that people call their representatives before the vote tomorrow. Call early, call often to try and stop this monstrosity. Helene, I appreciate you taking some time for us and sharing some of your thoughts. Great talking with you.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
Always great talking with you. Again, just please call early, often, all of that. Just is absolutely amazing to me. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Good talk.
So you wake up in the morning just to work and fight yourself, and then somebody tells you that you're owned by someone else. So what's it all about? It's money! Work it out! The people of today so tired and so lost. Their argument for freedom is how much will it cost? So what's it all about? It's money! Work it out! Money! Money! All around! Sink the game before it drags you down! Down!
corporations and their academic cohorts keep trying to make an industrial tomato to rival Mother Nature's product. And they keep failing. They might consider this instead, the Rutgers 250. It's a revived version of the classic hybrid tomato bred in 1934 by Rutgers University and Campbell Soup. Its excellent flavor and texture made the Rutgers variety the tomato of choice for years, eventually accounting for 60% of all tomatoes grown commercially in the U.S. But it fell out of favor in the 1960s when big industrial growers in California and Florida switched to hard and tasteless tomatoes bred to withstand the crushing power of the harvesting machines they had begun using. The Rutgers variety soon disappeared from grocery bins and was forgotten until 2009. That year, with the good food movement mushrooming and with consumers demanding that supermarkets sell truly flavorful tomatoes, plant breeders discovered that Campbell still had genetic material from the parent plants used 75 years earlier to develop the original Rutgers variety. So, for 8 years, they've been working with it again, using crossbreeding techniques that go back to Latin America's pre-Columbian natives. Slowly but surely, they brought back the Rutgers and its natural flavor, glowingly described as, quote, the very taste of summer. The resurrected Rutgers is not hard enough to be machine harvested and shipped across country, which is one of its major virtues. The fact that this tomato must be grown and marketed regionally is one step toward a decentralized, deindustrialized, and better food economy. This is Jim Hightower saying, instead of trying to squeeze nature into a high-tech corporate model, this tomato represents an understanding that our food system can and should cooperate with nature and foster the growth of regional economies.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So the big headline today that grabbed my attention. So the big headline today that grabbed my attention. FBI warned Trump in 2016 that the Russians would try to infiltrate his campaign. And the other one that grabbed my attention, also on the Russian front, is that evidently the Republicans on the Senate Intelligence Committee, they want to look into Jill Stein. And you remember the picture with Jill Stein and Michael Flynn sitting at the same table as Putin? And back then I even said, look, the Russians were casting a wide net. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world. And in Washington, D.C., Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So what do you think? Jill Stein now going to be the focus? Will that be the direction the Republicans go to kind of poo-poo all this stuff away?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't read that story. She ended up at a table with Putin?
Well, the same table that everyone, you've seen the picture with Flynn sitting at the table with Putin. Well, Jill Stein was at that same table. RT had an event. They were all sitting there, and at the time, it's been months ago, Jill Stein's name got thrown into the middle of this. And look, do I doubt that Jill Stein was looking for help anywhere she could get it? Absolutely not. Do I think she deliberately colluded with the Russians? No. But, like a friend of mine who was a former CIA agent said, look, a lot of times you get sucked into these things and you don't even know you're in it.
Sure. We had a case one time, we went to see a project and actually got a warning to never, ever go back there again. They were offshore company people, but they had a legitimate business that we needed the product for a security issue. So yeah, you never know. But I didn't hear about the Jill Stein story. I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Jill Stein never mattered. So, it just looks like now the Republicans are grasping at anything to deflect whatever is found that Trump may have done, so they can go, look, well, Jill Stein did it too.
Well, you're correct. She would go anywhere. She went to the Republican convention, so she'll go anywhere.
Well, I went to the Republican convention, but
I mean, I know, but she was running. I saw you there.
Oh well, we'll see where it takes us. I mean, it's interesting, and it's a nice, it's a good it'll make for a good TV movie in a couple of years, don't you think?
Oh, it will. There will be a movie. I've found with interest the article about the transition team, because, and I don't know if a lot of people understand it, but I know the transition is the political arm of the candidate that turns into the hybrid that becomes the arm that puts the president in, and how the White House functions and who's going to be picked. It interlocks with the bureaucracy. And of course, the bureaucracy is federal. Now, when they question, did Mueller have the right to get the emails? First of all, he can subpoena anything he wants, first of all. But second, once they interacted, I think it was 12 or 13 of them, Rick, once they interacted and they worked with the GSA, General Services Agency, that controls everything from, ordering products to, how the agencies function, then their emails are in that domain, which is government, public.
Yep.
That's
no,
easy.
I mean, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of these emails. And my first thought was, well, we'll see how Trump likes it now. And well, my first thought was maybe WikiLeaks should have leaked them, and we could have had the whole games that went on with the Hillary emails. Wouldn't that have been fun?
Oh yes. I mean, think about something though. I mean, it's modern. I know it's modern. I'm an old guy, but everything's emails. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I mean, everything is emails. Everybody throw your email machine away.
Email machine. I like that.
Yeah.
No,
and
it's
computers. I'm old.
Oh, no, we find out that all the texts are kept by the NSA. All of this stuff, it's all there. And, I've been saying for years, I don't write anything down that I don't want somebody else to read or I'm not going to stand next to. If I'm going to say something, that I don't want anyone else to know, I'm going to talk to you face to face.
Correct.
And even then, who knows? But we'll see what comes out of all of this. Let's get to today's news. Big Amtrak derailment. What happened?
Oh, that one is really tragic. This was the inaugural run of that line, which was going to what they called the Cascades in the area of Tacoma, Washington, the state of Washington. And just so unfortunate, on that run, it had 78 passengers in the crew, and it derailed and it toppled over onto the interstate. I mean, it was just horrific. I think the last count was 7 are dead and just, I think 70 some injured. It was just a horrific accident, quite tragic.
Do we have any idea what caused it? I mean, as you said, it was the inaugural run. I mean, to be honest, the first thing I thought this morning is, we're doing a tax plan, giving $1.5 trillion away to the very wealthy and to big corporations, and our infrastructure is crumbling. And then I found out, well, this is this is the inaugural run. But yesterday we had the power outage at the Atlanta airport, and you start going, are we going to start heading down this path where a couple of days in a row of horrible infrastructure stories?
Well, Rick, I was on the transportation committee. Don Young was the chairman of it, and we had all the analysis across the country, and bridges, as you know, are in disarray and dangerous and crumbling. Our grids, we had certain cities all on one grid. There were no multiple grids. The U.S. Capitol itself at one time was strictly on one grid for information purposes. That's all changed. But you look at this, and the Atlanta airport, it kind of boggles your mind that the whole thing would go out like that. But I think it's, like anything, the infrastructure needs constant updating, and it needs constant attention.
Yeah, you know what we could do? We could take this $1.5 trillion that we're going to be giving to big corporations and the very wealthy and put that on a down payment to fixing our infrastructure, because the last Society for Civil Engineers report that I saw has this is months ago, had our need at about $3.7 trillion. I'm sure it's up north of $4 trillion as we speak, and only getting worse the longer we do nothing.
Well, that's correct. I mean, our interstate system is relatively new in the terms of, Eisenhower and the interstate system, because a lot of people think we've had it for, 80 years, and we haven't. But when you've got something that is that old that was built, and then, as you know, continuing populations and people traveling, you just have to keep up with it, or it will go rapidly down.
Yeah, I just went bumping down the Pennsylvania and Ohio Turnpike this weekend, and look, the roads are terrible. I mean, we were stopped at one of the rest stops in Pennsylvania, and it said they were doing this wonderful promo video on the screen. It's 70 years ago when the Pennsylvania Turnpike was opened, and allowed people to go from one end of the state to the other uninterrupted. And I'm going, except for all of the orange cones and all of the construction that's going on, and more that needs to be done.
As you know, I'm from Belmont County, down from Steubenville, Ohio, and of course, our connection, we're Ohio, but our connection is not Columbus. It's always been Pittsburgh, And I can remember as a kid and as an adult, and not too long ago, it's always under construction. Everything's under construction.
It never fails.
There's always.
Yeah, I mean, I used to joke that, especially there's a part up in Connecticut that's been under construction for as long as I know, and I go, there are people retiring on this stretch because it's just so bad, and the traffic and the demand is so great. It's just amazing. And again, you look at this insane tax bill. We could have used this money to invest in better and future technology and moving us forward. Instead, we're just going to put another $1.5 trillion on the credit card.
Well, look, they're not going to shut the government down. They're not going to address the budget issues. It won't be done. No. I love this drama. I call it the profiles in courage. We're to the edge. The government could shut down. We're going to step up and be responsible. It's continuing budgets. That's what's done. It's been done for 12 years. It's not a responsible way. How it just increases in the deficits, and how can you do some planning? I mean, they could do infrastructure planning, bonds, especially designed funds to replenish itself. There's a lot of things they could do, but they won't. Yeah. But this whole facade of drama about the shutdown is absolutely ridiculous.
It's like an episode of 24. And one of the things I always remember you told me a couple of years back when we were in the heart of the constant shutdowns during the Obama term. And you said, when you were in Congress, it was a yawn vote. You already spent the money. You go in, you pay your bills, you spend the day, go play golf. It was a yawn vote. And you go, of course, the time to argue and debate is before you spend the money.
Right. And I always do. You've got a great memory. I do refer to it as the yawn vote. I think under the time of George Bush alone, I believe I probably voted 6 times with a lot of other people, not everybody, but a lot of people. And you voted, and that was it. Because again, just as you rightfully explained, this is codifying or supporting money already voted on. So if they didn't want to do this, don't vote for that money in the first place or appropriate it. This is paying for what they've already put into the system.
Yep. No, I mean, it's just amazing to me. Let's move on. I understand. Do we have a new national security strategy with Russia, or don't we? Did Russia meddle in our elections, or didn't they? Do they meddle in other people's elections and not ours? Do we know anything new?
Well, the Congress mandates that the president has to develop and publish a national security policy. Normally, if my memory serves me correct, I think they're normally published as what I'll call a white paper, so the president's national security policy. This one was, personally given by President Trump because, he will get publicity by doing that, obviously. It dealt with climate change. Now, that one was easy to understand. He is reversing what President Obama said about it being a national security problem. So you can put your hands around that of what he did or didn't do. Now, of course, the theory also out there is foreign countries, climate problems have generated dry areas, lack of food, riots, rebellions, takeovers, terrorist takeovers, et cetera. So that's part of the national security draw. But he's undoing that as part of national security. The part that I really struggled with, because I've been doing stations all day, Rick, and I read the reports and I reread them, and I read one of them on air, which was a mistake because I couldn't follow what we were trying to actually do when it came to terms of China and Russia. There were statements that were really hard to follow, but I think it's kind of the tough line, approach on Russia. So we've been all over the board as how we deal with Russia.
Right.
All over the board.
So I know this is a stretch. Could it be safe to say that maybe Trump wrote this? Because there's part of me that have you ever tried to read a Trump statement? Something that he said. Have you ever tried to actually just see it in writing and try and follow the scattered train of thought when it's actually in writing? I mean, listening to him is one thing. It's it's a kind of a train wreck and kind of a moment of mystery theater. But trying to read it is really an exercise in insanity. I mean, I'm just wow. Someone speaks like this.
Well, he does speak like that, and that's how you can kind of tell when he writes a tweet or he doesn't. You can kind of tell that way. But the policy, I don't know. I mean, I didn't carry it honestly much on radio today because, okay, here's the policy. We're going to get tough on China and economics. Have we not heard that over the years?
Sure.
Yeah, right.
That is. So did Russia collude in our elections or didn't they?
Well, I don't know that we've determined yet. I mean, we can all take educated guess as to what we all think about it. They took out ads, under different names, and they did it on Facebook. And as far as hacking into the computers, I don't think that occurred where they were changing the vote. But
no, I don't think they've done that. But
anybody that tries to influence, or if we've tried that in foreign elections, we will be accused of trying to influence the vote.
Yeah. One of the things the document said, though, is through modernized forms of subversive tactics, Russia interferes in the domestic politics or political affairs of countries around the world. But it didn't say that they did it in the U.S., but they did it around the world, which I thought was an interesting kind of, they say they do it, just not here.
Oh, so they did say that they have done it in different parts of the world.
Yeah, that's what the report says. So they're saying that Russia does it in other places, but they didn't say that it said anything directly happened here in the United States. So, in fact, the report said Russia uses information operations as part of its offensive cyber efforts to influence public opinion across the globe. Its influence campaigns blend covert intelligence operations and false online personas with state-funded media, third-party intermediaries, and paid social media users or trolls. I find it interesting that a document says trolls. But there you go. All right, so let's wrap things up. The client part of this, you said that we're reversing what Obama did, and I guess Trump is now saying going to move completely out of the climate talks with the Paris Accord. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, two separate things. One is removing us from the Paris Accord. Then today's statement, which wasn't necessarily geared to the Paris Accord, but today's statement is more of an official statement saying that climate change has nothing to do basically with our national security. President Obama had tied climate change and national security. Now, by the way, and I'd be interested to find this out, the military actually states and has stated in its reviews that climate change is a problem for us with national security. For what
of course
it does
it is.
to other countries.
I mean, I think it is, because when you have the kind of wave of refugees and the kind of wave of movement that you're going to get as things get worse, of course that's going to be a national security issue, because they're going to probably want to come here.
Well, and our own national security of, if you've got a population, not enough need, not enough down the road, land for food. I mean, there's a whole series of ways we could look at this down the road. Let's look 50 years down the road here.
We can't. Look, I'm finding it hard with this administration to think past tomorrow, let alone 50 years down the road. Oh, I don't know. Bob, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you.
Thank you.
Always great. Our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So the big headline today that grabbed my attention, FBI warned Trump in 2016 that the Russians would try to infiltrate
I'm Rick
his
Smith,
campaign.
and this is
The other
Labor
one that
History
grabbed my
in 2.
attention
On this day in
Russian
labor
front
history,
is
the
that
year was
evidently
1991.
Republicans
That
on the
was the
Senate
day that
Intelligence
thousands
Committee,
of workers at the
they wanna
U.S.
look
General
into Jill
Motors factory
Stein.
got some very
You
bad
remember the
news.
picture with Jill-
Campaign hoped to revitalize consumer interest in GM. But the ads were not enough to reverse the company's slide in the marketplace. From 1980 to 1991, General Motors' share of the U.S. auto sales had fallen from 46% to 35%. The joke became that instead of the heartbeat of America, GM was the heartbreak of America. One of the plants to close was the Willow Run factory outside of Detroit. This was an iconic U.S. factory. It had been constructed during World War II to build airplane bombers. It was the largest plant in the entire world at the time. One worker in the plant, Rose Will Monroe, became known as Rosie the Riveter. GM purchased the plant in 1953. 7 million Chevrolets rolled off the plant's assembly line. When this plant closed, for many, it signaled the end of an era in U.S. manufacturing. The United Auto Workers Union leadership considered the massive layoffs as GM responding to Wall Street rather than its workers. In an interview with the New York Times, UAW President Owen Beaver declared, "The proper answer to the insatiable demands of the Ebenezer Scrooge types who run Wall Street is not a snappy yes sir salute." But many GM workers went into that holiday season with an uncertain future on the horizon.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
Why don't you hit me with your best shot? Hit me with your best shot. Fire away.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So again, I'm still stuck on this Susan Collins, this quote. I mean, it's just, I guess the hashtag sellout Susan is probably appropriate about now. Buying the conservative line, buying the tax relief and reform will lift our economy, leading to higher wages for workers and more revenue for government. Exactly when, Susan? Explain to me exactly when that was. I know that's what you were told. I know that was one of the top talking points. I got it. I'm sure you got the memo. But tell me when. When was it that we gave tax breaks to the very wealthy and somehow that the working class of this country actually benefited? And the other part of this is, weren't you part of the not overturning and destroying the Affordable Care Act? And yet in this, millions of people are going to be left without insurance. Millions of people are going to be harmed by this. But hey, at least we're going to have a very wealthy wealth class. And again, as I've said for a very long time, and I'm hoping some entrepreneurial soul out there comes out with, when I was a kid, we collected baseball cards. Maybe my kids can collect billionaire cards. And we can all have our own favorite billionaire. I have mine. Everyone should. We've paid for them. Maybe that's the future. Anyway, let's find out what's going on and talk about this insanity and, well, how this is going to affect healthcare and especially mental health here in the country. That's why I've asked our good friend Propane Jane to come talk with us. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So tax plan, this is going to be great. Jane, this is going to be everything the working class ever wanted.
It's atrocious. I mean, I can't think of any other word. I mean, this is an atrocity in the making. And it's hard for me to fathom it actually happening, I think, because, as a doctor, this is so ingrained. I mean, our system has changed. It's had 7 years to modify itself in response to the Affordable Care Act. And every aspect of healthcare is affected by this massive piece of legislation. So in my mind, it's hard for me to even think how we actually do this, and if it is really dismantled, particularly the individual mandate. And so I think it's too horrible to even be true, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, but here we are. And, I keep going back to it, and I have to remind all of my rabid Trump supporter friends who say the individual mandate's bad idea, it's unconstitutional, it's horrible, it should never. I always have to remind them that it was a Republican idea. It was part of the answer to Hillary Care in the 90s. In fact, the ACA was the Heritage Foundation and Republican answer to Hillary Care. And I'm going, I'm not that old. Maybe it's my mind hasn't gone yet, but I think we should at least try and remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so crucial at this point in time, in particular, since we're always talking about economic anxiety, and sort of this class of individuals who are constantly feeling under pressure because of their socioeconomic status, and just think about actually just in very distinct detail what it's like for those people in the real world in regards to healthcare, because I've met a lot of people who are that classic Trump voter who feels like the individual mandate is a complete waste of time. And a complete waste of money. And why are we doing this? And people should just be able to buy it if they want it, and if they don't have it, then they don't have it. And I've met that guy, I've met that woman who loses their job. In particular, after the recession in 2008, that lost their job, therefore lost their employer-based health insurance. And due to their age, due to a confluence of other factors, all of a sudden, under the stress, they have a heart attack. And suddenly they don't have health insurance, right? So they end up in the local emergency room. And now they have, $200,000 worth of, and that's on the low end. Let's just say that they got lucky. And they have a $250,000 health care bill. And how are they going to pay for that? They have no job. They have no health insurance. And so that hospital either doesn't get paid, which is what happens most of the time,
or it leads to a second heart attack. When you open the bill, it's like, oh my gosh, you vapor lock.
Right, exactly. And so people have a hard time remembering that in 2008, I mean, medical, bankruptcy due to medical bills was, one of the number one causes for bankruptcy.
Yep.
And so people were completely going under because they had absolutely nothing. And so the purpose of the individual mandate, even though people think they're invincible and they think that their employer-based insurance is the best thing since sliced bread, and they think they're always going to have their job and their boss is never going to lay them off, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, reality is that that's just not what happens.
Right. And the other part of it is, and this as a doctor, I'm sure, that in this country, if you get sick and you go beyond what the Family Medical Leave Act allows, your employer can fire you, and then your health insurance goes away.
Absolutely.
And then you're uninsured. And this is where, I've been saying for years, well before the ACA and well before, the current debate on healthcare, that healthcare should have never been put in the hands of the employer class. And I do get the history that, back during World War II, it was one of those things that enticed workers to come. I get that, and labor fought for it. I get that. But it should have never been put in the hands of employers. And then you combine that with the recent, the Supreme Court case that said that, I guess your employer can tell you that whether you're going to get birth control or not.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is insane.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not, it's a business they shouldn't even be in. And again, when we talk about, class and caste system, right? I mean, when you tie health care to employment, well, you're automatically creating separate classes based on just who socioeconomically is fortunate enough to have a job that offers them health insurance. I mean, think about how many jobs don't even offer health care benefits, and how many people are in the Obamacare exchanges and on the marketplace because even though they work a job full time, or they work two jobs, and neither one of the jobs they have offers them basic health insurance. This is the situation that people are up against, and it's just really a crying shame that, that we're back here again, that we continue to have this same debate when the rest of the industrialized world has already made this decision a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it, and I don't know if you follow sports or anything, but I not too long ago I saw Roger Goodell, the NFL head guy, who got a contract extension, something like $200 million,
right,
over 4 years, and one of the demands in there was long-term health care.
Yeah.
He wanted health care. The guy's got a contract worth $200 million, and they're saying upwards of $500 million possible, and yet he demanded health care be part of the package.
Yeah, because nobody wants to pay for that. I mean, first of all, people don't even understand how much their health care costs. They have no idea. And so to put it in the numbers that we're talking about, I mean, some of these medications, if you wind up with cancer or you wind up with some obscure condition where the drug you need just to even stay alive or even have a chance of survival is $6,000 a month or more.
No, it's just crazy. And yet we're the country that says, nope, we're better than negotiating for drug prices. We're Americans, damn it. We're going to pay full price. In fact, we're not just going to pay full price. We're going to pay the full inflated, bloated price.
Yeah, and we're going to do it because billionaires and millionaires need more money, apparently.
Yeah, well, like I said, I have a favorite billionaire. Do you?
I mean, do you remember when Bill Clinton created a surplus?
I do, and I remember Alan Greenspan, and this is one of those things that people say, no, that didn't happen. I remember Alan Greenspan fretting about what the world would look like if we were debt-free.
I mean, they couldn't fathom it, right? It was their worst nightmare.
They had no idea what the future would look like in a country that was debt-free. And it was mind-blowing at the time. And I said at the time, and this is, going back to, the late 90s, they're going to screw it up.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the reason why I bring that up is because when I was getting my master's of public health, I had a class it was a basic class just on healthcare policy. And essentially the way that they talked about, this modern era of healthcare policy sort of went back to the Bill Clinton era and said, okay, we had this surplus when he handed over the keys to the White House in 2000. And just think what we could have done had we put that money into expanding our public health care system and working on universal health care.
Yep.
Instead of taking that detour through, 8 years of tax cuts and war and obviously the recession and everything that was done to turn that surplus into a massive deficit. And essentially, when you're thinking about, building your country or fortifying your country for the future, when you have that extra money in your pocket, I mean, what you're supposed to do if you have good sense is that you're supposed to invest it in the general welfare. And we didn't take that opportunity, and we turned around and just gave money to people who were already rich. And we're doing it again, even though, we as a country stood up and said, hey, we're electing Barack Obama because we actually want to move in this different direction with our healthcare system. I mean, that was the main reason why he even got elected.
Right. Let me ask you the other side of that then, since you brought it up.
Yeah.
How much do you think, because look, I'm with you. We should have been pursuing smart policy long before President Obama. And I'll be honest with you, and I'll be I've said this a bunch of times. The ACA was not what I wanted. It wasn't the best possible outcome. Was it the best we were probably going to get with the suit of characters that we had? Sure. But, I would have liked us much further down the road. But how much of these do you think is motivated by, and I hate using the racial card, but just, poor people shouldn't have this. And it's a way that we know that you get rid of poor people sooner. Because, you look at the life expectancy based on income, poor people live about 10 years less than wealthy people.
Yeah.
How much of that is by design? I mean, you look at this, you go, why do we want these poor people hanging on for another 10 years and we got to care for them? How much do you think that plays into the policy making, or am I just too cynical at this point?
I like to be as cynical as the next person.
So I've gone too far.
So I don't want to completely, discount that out of hand, but I think the larger issue is greed. And I think that it's greed above all else. And yes, poor people will certainly be affected. But ultimately, these are people who are hoarding as much money as they can. And if you think about all of the industries that are involved here, I mean, when you think about the pharmaceutical companies, and you also think about, it's very interesting in recent months, they've come out with sort of new guidelines for how to address the opioid epidemic. And suddenly they're saying, well, maybe certain states should think about legalizing marijuana. And it sort of speaks to the underlying issue of how much do pharmaceutical companies benefit from, the criminalization of marijuana. And when you think about all the medications that we take that are FDA approved versus all of the regulations that are opposed to herbal remedies and all of these other things, and how much is tied up in making healthcare cost as much as it possibly can.
Yeah.
Right? And to funnel people into certain systems that have a middleman, right? That have an insurance person who's there to basically collect your money, but then not necessarily guarantee that all of the premium you're paying is going towards your health care.
Yeah, and that's the other part
so all
of
of these elements of the system are based on profit.
And that's the other part of my other reasoning, because I've been a single payer guy for the longest time, just because we need just one insurance pool. I mean, even someone like Rand Paul gets that we need one insurance pool. Because look, what we do in this country masterfully is we take all of the risk out of health insurance.
Yeah.
We insure the children because they use health care first 5 years, and we insure the seniors who use health care last 5 years. Everybody else in the middle who have jobs, they're relatively healthy. They don't use a lot of health care, but they pay huge profits, huge premiums, and thus huge profits.
Well, we've kicked kids off of the rolls, so remember that, because they still have not funded CHIP appropriately.
Well, has it happened yet that kids are being kicked off? Because I know they haven't. I know here in Pennsylvania, the legislature has said they're going to pick it up for the short period of time.
Well, for the red states, go ahead and consider those kids kicked off.
Oh, that's terrible. And again, these are the people who are these are the family values. We love the children people.
Because they're not going to come up with a solution. They're already underfunding Medicaid. So, the plan is to just basically throw everyone to the wolves, because it means more money in their pocket that they don't have to spend helping other people that they don't care about, they don't know. And that's sort of the selfishness underneath all of this, and the lack of empathy, and the refusal to participate in society by helping your fellow man and woman and child.
And again, I go back to this is the continuation of the war on the poor. And again, I hate talking in racial terms. I talk about when I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. I was one of the lone white kids in an all black neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we used to play this neat game called Chase the White Kid and Beat Him Up. But I learned really young that the only color that really mattered was the color that wasn't in our pocket, the green. It was about money. We were all broke. And the same bad policies, and I still think that way, that it comes down to economic power. And if you don't have the economic power, you're going to be crushed. And I look at this tax bill as another one of those things that's just crushing poor people.
Yeah, but the thing is that who makes up the poor in America? The vast majority of the poor are still white Americans, right?
Yeah. And this is why I had asked. This is why I had asked part of the racial question, because look, how do you get a poor white guy who needs health care to say no, we don't need the Affordable Care Act because the others are going to get it? It's insane to me.
Hey, you got to ask Kentucky, right? I mean, they had Connect. They had it. I mean, they needed it as a state. But they were whipped up into this frenzy of Obama hatred, and they took it away from their own selves. And if you look at the map of counties that are going to be detrimentally affected by this tampering they're doing with Obamacare, it is going to be Trump counties. It's like over 70%, actually.
So does that will that transition into 2018 being a wave election to, to push back against every Republican who voted for this?
I mean, I think it's going to have to be. I think that the race in Alabama is something that is, to go back to sort of racial lines, I think that it's a lesson there on that standpoint, but I think it's also a lesson from a standpoint of just a rebuke of everything that the Republican Party is doing.
It's crazy.
Because this is an administration and an agenda that basically affects everybody detrimentally. It affects the 99%. And so that's why we can't even, the color line, like you said, is green, because it actually is affecting everybody across the board who isn't a 1%er, and that's a whole hell of a lot of people.
Yeah, it's insane, and this is why I keep telling people: call early, call often. There's again, eternal optimist. There's still time to stop this monstrosity.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that again, they're proving every day that they're attempting to rush it through because they know that Mueller is breathing down Trump's neck, and I really do honestly think that they're just trying to get it through, even though it's a piece of crap, because they don't think they have very much time left to do it.
Yeah, well, at least they can say even if it was bad, at least they did something. We'll
exactly.
See. Jane, I appreciate the time. I look forward to talking to you again next year. We'll be off the next couple of Mondays, obviously Christmas and New Year's.
Yes.
And I wanted to wish you and your family a wonderful holiday season. I look forward to having you back next year.
Y'all too. Be safe.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Propane Jane. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that Congress passed the 18th Amendment, which outlawed the transportation, manufacture, and sale of alcohol. The amendment went into effect 13 months later. According to John Rumbarger, author of Profits, Power, and Prohibition, the temperance movement centered on tightening social control of working people. Workers often met in bars and saloons to unwind after work and to socialize. But in the days before union halls, the saloon also doubled as a headquarters where workers could talk about problems on the job, like mistreatment and poor working conditions. They used the saloon as a place to plan and organize strikes. It also served as a site for workers to talk politics and organize around political parties. Many prominent industrialists complained that saloons were breeding grounds for labor unrest and radical politics. They also feared a growing immigrant working class that tied its fate to powerful political machines like those in Chicago, New York, and Boston. The anti-saloon movement brought a strange mix into its coalition. It included the KKK, who worried of the growing power of immigrant workers. But it also included progressives, who worked for labor harmony and sobriety as a means of public health. The anti-saloon movement also targeted German brewers. The United States had just entered World War I, and anti-German sentiment was so high that many considered German breweries to be working for the Kaiser, their product a sap on the energy of servicemen and grain production to feed the U.S. troops. But alcohol flowed freely throughout the 1920s, creating both the jazz speakeasy and bootlegging syndicates. It would ultimately be repealed by 1933. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Keeping the chambers of commerce within their gated communities. The Rick Smith Show.
just how crazy this administration is. I'll be honest with you. You got Scott Pruitt, who's the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. You may remember us talking about his skiff. He's got to have his own little phone booth, private, so we can, not hear what's going on. He's got a private security detail because he's, looking over the shoulder all the time. And I said back then, paranoid much? I don't know what it is you're doing. It sounds to me like a guy who's been cheating on somebody with somebody else's wife, always wanting secure phone lines, bodyguards. Turns out, evidently, the EPA, at the behest of Scott Pruitt, in March paid $3,000 to Edwin Steinmetz Associates. And what were they there for? They were there to do a covert, illegal sweep of covert and illegal surveillance devices. Don't want anybody listening in. Again, I go back to the paranoid much. Like I said, look, he's getting $25,000 for the phone booth, 24-hour security detail, which is dozens of people, dozens to follow every movement. Dozens of people with six-figure incomes following every movement. And oh, by the way, what they're going to do, and I was thinking about this as I was reading the article, and they were pointing out that he is the first head of the EPA to have or to demand and to have a 24-hour security detail. Which, think about it, 24 hours a day to have someone following you everywhere you go and checking every door and probably even tasting his food for all we know. You're talking about huge amounts of tax dollars, I would argue wasted, because I really don't care about this guy. And I don't think anybody else does either. Other than he's doing some really, really horrible and terrible. Really just terrible, horrible, horrible stuff. So, you look at this, and again, the horrible, horrible, terrible stuff. I guess we're going to pay for it by cheating federal workers out of wages. And, I came across this other article about a guy from the Heritage Foundation who has never really held a job in his entire life. For his entire life, he was a flack for the Heritage Foundation. He wrote, just the most outrageous stuff in attacking public workers. And look, public sector workers are again going to be under attack by the Trump administration as Trump's tool. This guy James Shirk, the guy who's been nothing but a Heritage Foundation flack, is evidently the one of the head guys leading this assault on federal workers. And what you have is the Trump administration now talking about another federal wage freeze. And thanks to Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, who has released this information saying, look, what the Trump administration is planning on doing in 2019 is freezing all federal wages. Now, remember, Trump's budget, that proposal that he came up with, the proposal was to make massive cuts to the employer contribution to retirement benefits of federal employees. That was part of his plan all along. So now you put this wage freeze into place. Look at the budget that Trump came out with that said we're gonna basically cut the employer's contribution to retirement plans. And then the House Republicans, who want to go after and, of course, demand higher health insurance premiums from workers. You're talking massive cuts in pay to our federal workforce. Now, you throw that out there with some of the other bad ideas that they want to do. And look, this is all in writing. I'm not making this up. This is this Shirk guy's writings. And it's stuff he's been very clear that he wants to do on how to basically strangle federal employees. Because what we've done masterfully in this country is we've created an environment where working people look at public sector workers with envy and jealousy that they make a reasonable wage and that they still have decent health care and a defined benefit health or a defined benefit pension fund. Again, in the Hunger Games that is the working class, right now we're looking at them with envy and going, you shouldn't have it. Instead of going, hey, how do the rest of us get it? And the simple answer to the rest of us getting it is, like federal employees, joining a union. There's a good idea so that you can collectively bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions. Again, not rocket science. And I go back to the Susan Collins quote saying that employers are going to raise wages for workers. No, they're not. You know how you raise wages for workers? You unionize and you demand, you demand part of the profit that you create through your labor. Common sense. Evidently, we've forgotten it. But anyway, what Mr. Shirk wants to do is really quite devious. I mean, all of these ideas that they came up with in their paper, like, basically restricting, within grade, what they call step increases. We're going to do it based on performance, not length of, not tenure, not seniority. No. We're going to decide whether you deserve a raise, like the private sector. So basically, no raises ever again, is what they're saying. They want to move away and destroy the defined benefit pension. Want to give those federal employees those wonderful defined contribution plans that the rest of the workforce gets. Those crappy 401ks that nobody has any money in, that they keep telling us we're going to be millionaires with, and, well, we're not. Remember that? Also going to shrink the pensions by recalculating, because how it is now is they take the average of the highest 3 years. And that's what your retirement is based on. And you get a percentage of that to live the rest of your life with some dignity. Now, that's a little more expensive for the employer. It is. But what it does is it creates a base, for us, the working class. And I think of my grandparents, who both had defined benefit pension funds that they lived on their entire lives. And they retired with some dignity, with security. They didn't have to eat cat food. They didn't have to worry about whether they were going to be able to buy medicine. They led a reasonable, respectable, dignified retirement. That's not what these people want. Also, Mr. Shirk wants to go and kill the retiree benefits for new hires. So anyone hired, again, creating a two-tier system and division within the workforce, anyone hired, no retiree benefits. Screw you when you get old. They want to extend the probationary period to a full 3 years instead of 1 year so that they can fire you anytime they want. And again, these are all things that you keep coming back to going, how is this going to benefit us as a country long term? It's not. It's not. They also want to cut paid time off like vacation and sick time. And they don't think federal employees shouldn't get federal holidays because their argument, and again, I come back to, I don't know why we don't demand it, but the private sector doesn't get it. If the private sector doesn't get paid holidays off, why should the public sector? And again, I keep coming back to, why don't we all get federal holidays paid off? Seems sane, rational, seems like something we should be pursuing. Sadly, however, we're not. And I look at all of this stuff and you put it all together, and it's really a quite devious scheme. And it's not Trump's doing. Trump's not this smart. This is what 40 years of think tanks and billionaire funded, people like this Shirk guy who have their entire lives, their entire work lives have been, how do you screw workers? That's been their entire thing. It's just nuts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Tell me how to go. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people.
Now time clock, so you might start representing. Say the USA is drowning in crafted lies. Say the USA and resume the ties it bind. Stop taking all our money and shipping it offshore. Do the job you're in looking for.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
found thousands of farm workers out in the fields of Ventura County without the protective masks that they need.
Officials warn of toxic smoke from Southern California wildfires.
The Arctic as a whole is warming at least twice as fast as the rest of the planet.
New bad news for the melting Arctic. At Global Summit, the world fights climate change without the U.S. Plus,
please come to France.
French president makes good on promise to fund U.S. climate scientists.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Coal. The science is in, and it's coal.
And that's all it is. And this is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it is damn near Christmas, and we are still fighting wildfires out here in Southern California.
Winter wildfires, which is really weird. But yes, the wildfires still rage in Southern California, and now state officials are warning of hazardous air quality in some areas, telling residents to stay inside to avoid exposure to toxic smoke and carcinogenic ash from incinerated homes. But labor activists warn that thousands of farm workers are still working outside in the dangerous smoke and have not received protective equipment from their employers. That's according to Lucas Zucker of the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy in an interview with Democracy Now!
We've found thousands of farm workers out in the fields of Ventura County without the protective masks that they need. You know, workers are really faced with this horrific choice of either giving up the income they desperately need in a time like this or be out in conditions that are endangering their health and safety.
And for people who don't know the area out here in Southern California, there are farms, orchards, a vast agricultural area. They call this part of Southern California the Salad Bowl because it produces so much of the food for the rest of the country. And I can only imagine what it's like out there working in those fields right next to these fires, which are hundreds of miles wide.
Disturbing news for the Arctic. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reports that this year clocked in as the second warmest year on record for the Arctic, with the smallest extent of sea ice ever on record. NOAA Arctic Director Jeremy Mathis warned that the rate and magnitude of sea ice loss since 2000 is unprecedented in at least 1,500 years. Studies have increasingly linked the melting Arctic to changing weather patterns and extreme weather events in the Northern Hemisphere. At the One Planet Summit in Paris this week,
we're in the process of losing the battle.
French President Emmanuel Macron called on European leaders and corporations to pick up the pace of action in cutting emissions that cause dangerous global warming. Macron also made good on an earlier promise, announcing multi-million-dollar grants to 13 U.S. climate scientists to conduct their research in France, after U.S. President Donald Trump, who was not invited to the conference, vowed he would withdraw the U.S. from the historic UN Paris Climate Agreement in 2020.
So we're not funding these scientists anymore. France has to step in and fund U.S. climate science.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
But American political and business leaders were also there in Paris to organize and to help developing countries prepare for climate impacts. Former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger offered some blunt reassurance.
It doesn't matter that Donald Trump backed out of the Paris Agreement, because the private sector didn't drop out, the public sector didn't drop out, universities didn't drop out, scientists didn't drop out, engineers didn't drop out, no one dropped out. Donald Trump pulled Donald Trump out of the Paris Agreement.
Among several major announcements at the summit, the World Bank and global insurer AXA said they will end all financing for oil and gas exploration starting in 2019. Major investors launched a campaign to pressure the world's top 100 greenhouse gas emitting corporations to reduce their emissions. And China's environment minister announced China is on the cusp of launching its nationwide carbon emissions trading market, which would be the largest in the world. Finally, the U.S. private sector is stepping up its investment in clean energy technology at home. Tesla Motors' new all-electric semi-truck was unveiled just last month, but it's already pulling in hundreds of pre-orders from major corporations. The latest from beverage giant Pepsi, which this week ordered 100 Tesla all-electric semis, citing its lower overall cost compared to conventional internal combustion semis.
Give it up, Desi Doyen. Elon Musk is not going to give you a free Model 3.
Oh, come on.
For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters, even in France, at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
We can't live in the wealthiest economy in the world, the richest nation in the world, and treat our workers like they're from the third world. Corporations are making profit.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. What a huge win we saw this week in Alabama. And truth be told, look, if we're going to get this country back on the right track and end the kind of insane corporate pandering that has created the wealthiest wealth class in the history of civilization at the expense of hardworking Americans, we're going to need to do more of what we saw in Alabama, and we're going to need to do more of getting people who work for a living into the halls of power. We need more people who know what an honest day's work is actually about, and also knows, what the struggle that comes with doing that honest day's labor and not getting that honest day's compensation. 2018 could be the year. Could be the year the working class of this nation wakes up and demands better. And better than what we're seeing coming out of Washington, and better than we're seeing coming out of state houses all across this country. And that's why we have and will continue to spotlight working class candidates who have taken that massive first step and said, you know what? And not getting that honest day's compensation. 2018 could be the year. And today I've asked Kathy the year the working class of this nation wakes up running for governor in the great state of Iowa. Kathy, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
I look at this and I often ask people, what made you take that first step? I guess the big Ted Kennedy question. Why?
Well, I'm a union nurse, and I'm sick and tired of watching people in our state, working people in the state of Iowa, getting beat up. Just this Republican governor and Republican legislature just last session gutted union rights for over 184,000 public employees that serve our communities. And then they didn't stop there, though, Rick. They actually went on and lowered the minimum wage in 5 of Iowa's largest highly populated counties, all at a time when in Iowa, a third of our families can't afford to pay their bills every single month. It's time we have a bold progressive governor that steps up and will take on the corporations and CEOs and stand up for working Iowans again. And that's why I'm running for governor.
Yeah, the hope is you look at all of these bad policies, and all of this stuff's been banging around for years. The think tanks have been throwing this stuff out. The state policy networks have been pushing this stuff. The ALEC legislators have been pushing it in legislatures across the country. And I'm hoping that 2018 is going to be that year where the anger from 2016 gets a brain and moves us in a positive direction.
And that's right. And I think what you saw in Alabama last night and in Virginia is an example that people are frustrated with a corporate system that's got a stranglehold on our state government and on our federal government. And so we need more voices out there. And our campaign is about engaging Iowans on a grassroots gut level on the things that they care about, like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, expanding and strengthening a worker's ability to join a union or employee association no matter where they work, because we know that unions are the only way that working people have ever gotten ahead in this country. And then we need to talk about universal single payer, and in Iowa, clean water is a huge issue, and we aren't funding public education because we're busy giving tax breaks to corporations that absolutely don't need it. So people should be angry. Iowans that I've listened to are fed up, and they're ready to rise up for bold progressive change in the state to turn things around.
And it's something we need desperately. And look, we need to take some of the governor's mansions across the country, because I look at just some of the insane policies that have come out, and more of the bad tax policies, more of the assaults on public education. You can just go down the list, and to have someone in that governor's mansion who knows what it's like to do a hard day's work and come up short at the end of the week, I think it's something vitally important just to moving us in the right direction.
That's right. We've got Iowa families that are working 2 and 3 jobs because we have such low wages in the state. They come home exhausted from working those 2 and 3 jobs, and then they find they still can't pay their bills. But yet we are willing to give tax loopholes and breaks to companies that don't need it, and to have tax reform that only benefits the wealthy and the rest of us keep falling behind. Iowans are ready for a governor who's not going to put party and politics first, somebody that's like them, that knows what it's like to have to go to work every day, and is going to stand up for them. And that's what our whole campaign is about, is giving Iowans a voice in their state government again. And it's really, we're building movement politics is what we're doing. And I will co-govern with Iowans, not a top-down approach to governing.
Yeah, good stuff. I saw this week, recently you picked up the endorsement of the National Nurses United. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I'm very honored. Just last week, I was honored to receive the endorsement of the National Nurses United, which is a national organization of registered nurses from across the country who have, like many of us, been fighting for healthcare reform and stand with me on passing a Medicare for All bill on the federal level. But if we can't count on the politicians in Washington to do the right thing, then as governor of Iowa, with NNU, the National Nurses United support, I believe Iowa can lead the way by passing a universal single-payer plan in the state of Iowa. And so I'm honored to have an organization like National Nurses United to stand with me in the fight for passing universal single-payer health care.
Yeah, I mean, because here's the thing, and I keep going back and forth with people about, healthcare to me is like one of the top 2 issues that I think working families struggle with. And there's 2 very competing views. There's the one that I think that I'm with you on is we need to have one giant insurance pool. We need to have single payer, and that you pay into it and you get the care that you need. And then there's the other view, and I point to Republican Representative Diane Black, of Tennessee, who recently said, and I guess she's running for governor as well. She recently said, quote, "There are people that came into my emergency room that I, the nurse, was the first one to see them. I could have sent them to a walk-in clinic or their doctor the next day, but because of a law that Congress put into place to say no, I have to treat everyone that walks into that emergency room." There's this view that health care, if you can pay for it, is something that you should be able to get, and that, well, if you're the unlucky, well, to the street with you.
Yeah, and as a candidate for governor, my view is that, and I'm an intensive care unit nurse. I have seen this up close, and I absolutely believe in my heart that healthcare is a fundamental human right, and it shouldn't be based on how much money you make or what you look like or where you come from. It is not, getting good health care is not a privilege. It is not a luxury. All Americans deserve access to and quality, affordable health care. And the only way that we're going to reduce costs and cover every single person, and particularly in Iowa, we've been attacked on this governor and legislature shut down mental health beds. Iowa is 49th in the nation for mental health beds for acutely ill, mentally, for folks that need mental health services. And then they didn't do just that. They shut down women's reproductive health clinics and defunded Planned Parenthood. We absolutely need to stand up and make sure that every Iowan, every American has access to all of those services and never has to worry about paying the bill at the end of the day. That's what we need to provide to Iowans, and we should do it on the federal level for all Americans as well. And I'm going to continue to use my healthcare voice as a registered nurse to keep pushing that agenda forward until we achieve it.
No, I think it's extremely important, and the hope is that people hear that message and come to your campaign. The other part of this is what we see on state levels all across this country is this assault on public education. I know here where I live in Pennsylvania, the charter school movement has it's a monster that's taken on a life of its own and really just sucking the treasury dry. I'm curious your position on public education and charters as well.
Well, you know, I'm a believer that we absolutely do not use any public funds for any private institutions when it comes to public education. You know, public education is the cornerstone of our state and of our nation, and it really is an economic engine in small communities as well as large cities as well. And we need to, instead of giving corporate tax breaks to companies like Apple to the tune of $20 million in Iowa, we are not investing in our public education in our schools, our K-12. So I'm running on a increasing the K-12 budget by 6%, and I would veto anything less than a 4% increase in K-12 funding. And then we need to fully fund our public universities as well to the highest level so that our students and our students get the highest quality education, and the teachers and the faculty and staff on our universities are paid a living wage, because right now they're not, and they need to be union jobs. Honestly, we should be organizing more workers into the union.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, it's a message that I don't think we hear enough. I keep hearing all these stories about inequality and sexual harassment and all of this stuff, and I go, there's an easy way to solve a lot of those problems. Give workers the power to have a voice on the job and to stand up for themselves.
Absolutely. And I talked about how the current governor and legislature gutted union rights. And so when I talk to Iowa voters, I talk about that Iowa voters are very upset about the unfair playing field that we've been given by stripping away union rights from so many hardworking employees in the state. And so we just not only have to restore collective bargaining and restore union rights to those 184,000 public employees. That's a good first step. Reversing what we lost and winning back what we lost is not enough. We need a governor, and I'm the only governor in this race as a Democrat that is saying that the governor and the state of Iowa should work to find new ways to help workers join together in a union or employee association, no matter where they work. Because that is the only way that working people have ever gotten ahead in our state and in our country, is through their union.
No, I'm right there with you. And it's that kind of message. And this is where I'm hoping that the Democrats, not just, the Democratic candidate in Iowa, but Democrats across this country reclaim that working class message that we're going to make people's lives better. We're going to help you get the tools to fight for better wages, hours, conditions. Your kids are going to get better opportunities at school. If you get sick, you're not going to go bankrupt. I think that's the minimum of where the party needs to go right now.
That's right. And, this is really about a grassroots movement. We're fighting for 15 union rights, universal health care for all. No candidate by themselves can do it alone. And so that's why we're building a people-powered movement that will help push the agenda forward in the state of Iowa and accomplish what we want to accomplish. But we can only do it if we turn out and get voters excited that they'll wait in line at the polls again, like we probably saw in Alabama. They had a huge turnout there. That's what we need if we're going to retake our state and our country for working families. And so our campaign is dedicated to doing that, and we are doing that by building a grassroots movement. And the other thing, Rick, is this isn't about me. My name may be on the ballot, but this is not about me. This is about the people that live in our state, the state of Iowa. They will be rising up to change the direction our state is headed. And I know that we can do this because the people of Iowa are ready for significant change. And it started in Virginia. It came out in Alabama just yesterday, and Iowa can lead the way in June and November of 2018.
Now, that is the hope. And Kathy, I wish you the best. I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. And look, I'm hoping Iowa is the beginning of leading us in the right direction.
Yes, we plan on, Iowa will lead the way, Rick. We will. We're going to rise up together for a bold, progressive future in 2018, leading into the presidential cycle in 2020, and we will lead the way. So thank you so much.
Good stuff. And if you want to check out Kathy's website, kathyglasson.com, we'll make sure we get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear your thoughts. And hey, if you want to help out, just go to our website, kathyglasson.com.
We plan on, Iowa will lead the way, Rick. We will. We're going to rise up together for a bold, progressive future in 2018, leading into the presidential cycle in 2020, and we will lead the way. So thank you so much.
Good stuff. And if you want to check out Kathy's website, kathyglasson.com, we'll make sure we get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear your thoughts. And hey, if you want to help out, just go to our website, kathyglasson.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around.
I don't believe that God wants me to give my money to someone like you. But I do believe in what a crazy man can do.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1991. That was the day that thousands of workers at the U.S. General Motors factory got some very bad news. The company's CEO, Robert Stample, announced that GM would eliminate 74,000 jobs and close 21 plants. The company was struggling. In 1987, they had launched a new advertising campaign. Dubbed the Heartbeat of America, the campaign hoped to revitalize consumer interest in GM. But the ads were not enough to reverse the company's slide in the marketplace. From 1980 to 1991, General Motors' share of the U.S. auto sales had fallen from 46% to 35%. The joke became that instead of the heartbeat of America, GM was the heartbreak of America. One of the plants to close was the Willow Run factory outside of Detroit. This was an iconic U.S. factory. It had been constructed during World War II to build airplane bombers. It was the largest plant in the entire world at the time. One worker in the plant, Rose Will Monroe, became known as Rosie the Riveter. GM purchased the plant in 1953. 7 million Chevrolets rolled off the plant's assembly line. When this plant closed, for many, it signaled the end of an era in U.S. manufacturing. The United Auto Workers Union leadership considered the massive layoffs as GM responding to Wall Street rather than its workers. In an interview with the New York Times, UAW President Owen Beaver declared, "The proper answer to the insatiable demands of the Ebenezer Scrooge types who run Wall Street is not a snappy yes sir salute." But many GM workers went into that holiday season with an uncertain future on the horizon.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists or bound?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Website, ricksmithshow.com. A couple of responses on the tax bill. A Tea Party listener says that he actually thinks that this tax plan is going to benefit him. He's angry about the individual mandate, which he pays the tax. He has chosen not to go into the exchange in a defiant move. And look, he's very honest about it. He deliberately did not sign up for the Affordable Care Act because it's Obamacare. And, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with someone who will deliberately go against what is in their economic interests? I'm not going to say their best interest because, I've had this thrown out of me. Well, who are you to tell me what my best interests are? Your economic interests are to have insurance so that if you're like one of the people who responded to one of our tweets, had a heart attack, $53,000 in debt, didn't file bankruptcy, but credit was ruined. Couldn't get a car loan, couldn't get anything. Had to take a bus 2.5 hours to get 10 miles just to get to work. And, this massive bill hanging over you. It is in everyone's best economic interests to make sure that they have health insurance so that when something happens, because look, none of us want to get sick. None of us want to end up at the hospital. None of us want to end up at the doctor's office. I know I don't. But sometimes it happens, and it's outside of your control. And this is what's really scaring me about this tax scheme, is that people are going to look at this as a celebratory moment, that the individual mandate's done and I'm going to save money because I don't have to pay for health insurance. And they're going to be vulnerable. And when crisis hits, that's when they're going to turn around and say, well, see, the government won't help me. They tried to help you. And you're going to have other people complaining that my rates are going up. And you're going to go, well, that's because, guess what? That's because you have all of this uncompensated care. I mean, it's crazy. It's really crazy. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, if something got your attention, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.
Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tide flood beneath the sway. Imperial, mysterious, and